Hello, Mark Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here. I want to talk about diminished triads. You know, in a recent music masterclass, I made the observation that diminished triads are, well, often masquerading as something else. In other words, a lot of the times when we see what appears to be a diminished triad, what's actually going on in the music is perhaps some other chord being implied. And so I want to talk about that with some specific examples here. We have a B diminished triad here, and let's say that I'm in the key of C. Well, a really common thing we might see is for that B diminished chord to go to C. Roman numeral wise, that's 7 diminished going to 1. And what's kind of really happening here is that this 7 chord is functioning as a dominant. It's said to have dominant function. And the 5 chord, if we play it as a 7th, G7, the 5-7 chord, has that diminished chord right within it. So a lot of times when we hear 7 to 1, we're really at some level hearing 5 to 1. You know, maybe no one actually has that root. Maybe no one has scale degree 5, but maybe it's buried in another part that you're not paying attention to. You know, maybe somewhere in the cello or something was a root of that chord that you just didn't notice for what was going on above it. So a lot of times when we have a 7 chord, it's really 5-7, a dominant 7th chord. So that is one really common situation where you might see something that looks like a diminished chord, but it's really functioning as something else. The other one that's really common is if we look at the same chord, but now I don't think of it as being in C major, I think of it as being A minor, and this is the 2 chord. It's pretty common to see 2 and then 5 and then 1 in a minor key. And in those situations, it's very common that 2 chord really has an implied 7th on it also, as a half diminished chord. So often when you see this diminished triad, it's really implying the presence of this 7th. And again, maybe it's actually there in another voice, and maybe it's in the melody, and you didn't notice it because it's not written down in a chord somewhere, but it's present in the melody. So a lot of the diminished triads you see in minor keys, if it's a 2 chord, is really kind of functioning as this half diminished 2 chord, and then going to 5 and then to 1. So those are a couple situations where you see a diminished triad, but mentally you might want to think of something else. That B diminished could really be G7 if it's going to C, or it could be a B half diminished if it's going to E. And those are both common situations where you see a diminished triad, but it's maybe it's functioning as something a little bit different.